Hi. I was told I have to speak through the mic. I'm sorry, it's very loud. But yeah, you've seen the first slide. I don't want to say too much. I'm going to just play you a video first, and then I thought it would be nice afternoon presentation to have a lot of also visual and sonic elements in it. So there'll be time for you to watch and listen to some things. So before I explain what this is all about, I want to play something quite short. Oh wait, I have to use the clicker. Hope the sound works. No. So that's the first kind of, oh, that's how it works, I see, got it. So that was kind of a first taste of what this presentation is about. It's about the largest social movement that's happened in Poland in the last 30 years, 40 years now, since the Solidarity movement in the 1980s. This was the women's strike kind of high point in the winter of 2020-2021. Which was caused by the Polish Constitutional Tribunal announcing basically a de facto abortion ban in a country where abortion is already heavily restricted. So this is the context to the protests that were unleashed. They lasted for 3 months. So they lasted from the 22nd of October 2020 until the 26th of January 2021. They were the largest, not just in terms of numbers of people in the street, which was the largest, but also in terms of the number of cities and towns that are involved. So it wasn't just in the big cities, like the video we just saw was from Wrocław, which is one of the big cities in Poland, but there were protests in, I don't want to say all of the towns, but in really across the entire country. So it was in that way also extremely broad movement that also brought in a lot of different elements. So you saw in the video maybe there were a lot of groups also taking part, so like bus drivers and train drivers and taxi drivers, and you didn't see that in this video, but farmers and other trade unions. That it was a moment of hope that unfortunately was in this kind of direct impact not successful because the ban was not overturned. But what this presentation is about is that the movement was not unsuccessful, despite it's maybe the one, the kind of crux that we were fighting for we weren't able to overturn that because the ban was published as a law, which means that it is in force. What I would try to show is that through sound and music that was used in that protest, we can actually learn that of the successes of it. So this is the kind of premise of the presentation, the project, and I think it's relevant when we're talking about kind of standing up for issues like the Kundgebung tomorrow and how kind of in artistic ways we can participate. I want to kind of show it from the other side, that social movements already are very artistic. They are full of sound and music, and I think that sometimes for me there's still a bit of a gap in this kind of in coming together in this, but actually a lot of artists were part of this by doing things for the movement, for the collective. So I will, and then there's a little kind of academic. I'm not going to make this too academic. I will mostly show videos, I promise. But there's something to understand about these protests, which is why they were so significant in the history of Polish feminism, but also feminism in general. In that it was kind of, the first quote I think is very nice. It's from Ewa Majewska, who's a very important Polish feminist thinker and scholar and activist, and also artist, and a curator. And she said that the debate between reformism and revolution was absent, everybody was protesting in ways they found most convincing and available. And that includes every means possible. And I'll show you just some examples, but what I would like you to have in mind throughout the presentation is that it is that they're all part of one big collective uprising, that it wasn't about one individual action, one individual piece of art or sound of music that was being kind of used in it, but actually that it was that everybody was doing what they could to be part of this movement. So it's about this kind of idea of collectivity and coming together, also through sound, and how sound can actually help us hear that was happening. And then the other important thing to have kind of back in your minds is that the reason this was so significant is you will see this in about 3 weeks' time. The way that the mainstream media tend to like to report on what's going on in Poland is they really like to focus on the rise of the right wing. So always on our Independence Day, which is 11th November, there's always photos in all of the major newspapers of men marching through the streets with red flares, with neo-Nazi slogans, with actually really quite homophobic, racist, everything slogans that we, of course, don't want to see. And what this movement was doing is trying to reclaim that space away from what is an extremely masculine space. The streets of Poland have been extremely masculine, not just through these kind of moments of these days they have, but actually in general, they have become dominated by these kind of discourses. They have, for example, these vans that drive around cities in Poland that have pictures of unborn fetuses on to discourage people from having abortions. I've seen them in my eyes. They are really horrendous. So this is the other thing that was very significant about this. And I think this idea of taking up public space, both with your bodies, but also with sound, is really a really huge part of this kind of fight. So the next thing is I will play something, and then I will ask you to tell me what you heard. I hope if there are Polish speakers or people that understand Polish here, I would maybe ask you not to say what you understood from the words, but more about what you heard in terms of what is going on in this clip, which I hope I can play. It's not, you're not meant to see it.
Słuchajcie, policja proponuje, żebyśmy poszli chodnikami. Co wy na to? Co napierdala? Na razie do nas mówi. Pytanie, co robimy?
Tu policja na podstawie przepisów prawa wzywa się osoby zebrane w tym miejscu do opuszczenia, nie blokowania jezdni. Proszę o odejście z jezdni. Wasze zachowanie jest niezgodne z prawem. Prosimy o odejście z jezdni.
Okay, maybe if anybody wants to tell me what they heard. I know it's very chaotic, but that's what a protest sounds like. Do you want to start? I know what happens, and I'll show you the video with the images so you can see. But I wanted to kind of maybe engage with what you hear when you are kind of part of this soundscape. Okay, if we don't have any volunteers, I'll play the video, but the reason for wanting to do it this way is to kind of... But I specifically... Yeah, but that was the kind of the point that I was trying to get you to feel what was going on and the kind of sounds that you were hearing, and if they were making you feel differently. Yeah. Yeah. Yes. Yeah, it was. Exactly. That's kind of what I wanted you to feel, that like the male voice is the voice of state authority. There were also female voices, individual female voices. They were trying to make them shut up. So that's exactly. So like for me, this is when what you hear is that the voice of state authority tends to be male, especially in these kind of spaces, especially in where women and queer people in Poland, of course, they're also extremely targeted, and the let's say femme voices are not seen as voices of authority. There were voices, and I'll show you now the video of women actually trying to give counter instructions to the protesters. But it's this kind of discrepancy that when you're just hearing it, you have association that is the voice I should be listening to, is the man's voice, because that's what that's the voice the police is deliberately using because they know. So this was kind of the intention of introducing you to the sound of these protests. So I'll play the video with the
Słuchajcie, policja proponuje, żebyśmy poszli chodnikami. Co wy na to? Ty napierdala, na razie do nas mówi. Pytanie, co robimy?
Tu policja. Na podstawie przepisów prawa wzywa się osoby zebrane w tym miejscu do opuszczenia, nieblokowania jezdni. Proszę o odejście z jezdni. Wasze zachowanie jest niezgodne z prawem. Prosimy o odejście z jezdni.
Right. So that's what you heard the first time round. It's extremely chaotic, and actually it's a very, very tense situation, but at the same time, like you said, there's a lot of joy in there, because people coming together in this way was extremely joyful. And this is what the next part of the presentation will be, is that actually through sound, and it's not just about bodies being together, of course that is part of it, but also through the sounds we create together, it actually creates joy, because we are saying the same things, we are kind of uniting in the slogans that we're shouting, but also the kind of, the samba band is meant to be there to uplift the morale. It's a lot of it is meant to be joyful, because if you're trying to get people to come in the streets every day for 3 months, you have to make them want to do that, and that's really hard. It's hard enough to get people out in the street one time. If you're trying to do it for 3 months, it's a real challenge, and people were trying to find different ways, different joyful ways, different ways that were based around kind of sound and music and the arts to get people out there. Yeah, I think for me, this was kind of the introduction to this, and maybe just one more thing to say about this video is that, again, not to make it too academic, but there's this very nice way of looking at hearing, or a very nice way of hearing or listening to protests is when you read Henri Lefebvre's rhythm analysis. Actually, he says that the street can be listened to as a symphony, and it's about finding out who is actually leading, or who's trying to dominate, who's trying to direct or conduct what you're hearing there. And I think for me, what I hear in this video is a struggle between the protesters and the state, because that, for me, the sound is a open struggle that's playing out in the streets about who those streets belong to, and actually, in a much grander way, also who Poland belongs to in that time, because actually it's also about what kind of state or what kind of place, society we want to be living in, because they are presenting two very different ways of life. One is extremely Catholic, very family orientated in a very kind of heteronormative nuclear family way, led by the church, and the other way is much more open. Queer people were very involved in this protest too, which were leading actually a lot of it as well. So it's about kind of breaking down these barriers as to what this nation is meant to be, even though I don't like to talk about these categories. So oh yeah, this was just a little context to what I just talked about with what the Polish government or the Polish state is trying to do. And the way that the Polish, maybe I'll just read it. Poland's conservative government is also promoting a valorous vision of Poland's past, emphasizing its rare military victories and fetishizing the more common failures, thus imposing on the population a heroic, martyrological model of citizenship and political agency. So that means that all national symbols belong to this idea of the nation that the government is currently trying to promote. So what happened in these protests is that they were trying to reclaim national or nationalist symbols as well, knowing that this is the focus of the ruling party or the government. So for example, this is an image you would typically see during the right-wing marches, because the red flare is their thing, and it looks very creepy. But actually this is from the women's protest, because they were deliberately trying to kind of say, we can do it too, and actually none of this belongs to you. So I will now show you two very short examples of two very important kind of national symbols. So the first one is a rewritten epic poem by Hanna Grześkiewicz, who is one of Poland's greatest, it's like the Polish Shakespeare, that they mounted in an apartment opposite where Kaczynski, who's Poland's basically leader, lives, basically in the house opposite his house. And you'll just see how many people went to see this play. That's one example. It basically goes on like this. And then the next example is in Poznań, during the protest, they decided they would block the streets with the Polish national dance, the Polonaise. And what they're shouting here is, I apologize for swearing, is jebać PiS, which means fuck peace, which is the ruling party, which is relevant for the next part of what I'm going to show you. And also, if you notice, the rhythm of what they just chanted was the same rhythm that the cars were beeping in the first video. We probably don't remember it now, but it's the same, because that was what everybody was shouting. It's also about this idea of reclaiming the streets and kind of getting away from the preconception that women need to be proper when they're out, or that there is a certain way of being a woman or being a female-presenting person in the street, that actually we can do whatever we want. And people were angry. We were really angry. So that's what happened. That's also like a matter of sound. Like, how often do you hear thousands, hundreds of thousands of basically femme voices shouting swear words in the street? Like, I've never heard anything like this before, and it was for me like an extremely kind of bodily reaction to hearing it for the first time. And personally, I found it much more impactful than when I saw it written down, even though it was written everywhere too. So the two main slogans were actually swear words. Right, so that's that part. And then I have very little time to present this whole thing. So the other thing that I wanted to kind of point to is that, well, this quote basically: solidarity involves commitment and work, as well as the recognition that even if we do not have the same feelings or the same lives or the same bodies, we live on common ground. And the idea of these protests on the whole was that we were all doing it for the collective, for the movement, and there wasn't this kind of course there were leaders who emerged, but it's not really about this idea of individuality in them and everything that was done and everything that happened. Like, you know, I'm going through a lot of examples, but because it was huge, there's so much to think about when you think about sound in a protest. And a lot of it was, of course, what I already said about fighting for public space, and it was this kind of idea of art of the commons. And there was so many artists who were involved in it too. And obviously visually it was quite simple to have the sense of belonging, because the red lightning bolt, which you can see being graffitied on the street there, that was the kind of symbol that people associate with the movement. And when they say, and when you see people wearing that somehow, or having displayed in their windows, you know they're an ally, or you know they were part of the movement, or they are still confident enough to display that publicly, which is very important in terms of like claiming the visual of the public space. But of course, the sound doesn't resonate in the same way as a visual element. But I think what sound does is it kind of it stays within your body. So the way I hear a lot of this stuff, actually I have quite an emotional reaction to it. I feel like I'm there again. I feel like I'm with my friends and my, I don't know what to use, comrades, colleagues, I don't know, other activists, other people in the streets, community. Exactly, I feel like I'm there again. And for me, that's the thing that lives on is the memory, because for me sound is extremely effective with an A. So exactly, this is examples of the visual that it was really everywhere. Like this is on top of a mountain in southern Poland. Like this, you know, it was just meant to be everywhere. Like the point was that we are everywhere and everybody is angry. So there's some, I will just give, I don't know how much time I have actually. Okay, not so long. So I will give maybe, this is quite an important example. So you heard that chant, jebać peace, and so these kind of ideas of joy and the collective and being together and having fun together, as well, while also being angry, because actually, if you know, the feelings of anger and joy in a protest are completely interchangeable, same as fear and hope. Like you are going back and forth between those two kind of sets of emotions the whole time. But one of the, I think, funniest things that happened, which I think is amazing to this day, is that this chant was basically used within as the chorus of a song that you probably all know, which is Eric Price's "Call on Me," and it became the anthem of the movement, which I think is very, very funny. And every time we played it at a demonstration, everybody thought it was like the biggest morale booster ever. So that's basically what we did, you know, because we were trying to get people to come back, and people thought it was really fun. And actually, it was really fun. It was very funny. We did it once here, and people were dancing to this song outside, like in front of Brandenburger Tor, and I think that's kind of hilarious. I don't think I have so much time for some of the other things, but what I will show you is maybe a couple of examples of what we did with my collective, and just in terms of like what the kind of the differences that were existing in terms of I don't know what happened there. Okay, anyway, the idea is to show the different kinds of responses, like both musically and artistic. I don't know what I'm doing. Anyway, the first one I want to show you is a techno demonstration that we did. And then it's back, okay.
Które stoją na protestach dzisiaj. W imieniu rodzin, które naraziliście na strach i wykluczenie. W imieniu dziewczyn, młodych kobiet, które wiedzą, że Polska nie jest dla nich przyjaznym krajem i będą się bały podejmować decyzje o macierzyństwie. W imieniu tych kobiet, które dzisiaj są wypisywane ze szpitali, kiedy odmawiane jest im prawo do aborcji przy wadzie letalnej, o której pani minister powiedziała, że macie pomoc psychologiczną dla dzieci z wadą letalną, pani się dołączy, pani minister, to wstyd i hańba.
That's one example. It goes on like that a bit. Then there's another quick one, is somebody rewrote the anti-fascist song Bella Ciao.
Pewnego czwartku polski trybunał chciał przejąć moje ciało, twoje ciało. Ciao, ciao, ciao. Pewnego czwartku polski trybunał wyżegnam wojnę w biały dzień. Więc jeśli nie chcesz...
And the words basically say, on one Thursday, the Polish tribunal has decided to make decisions about my body, and moje ciało means my body, which sounds like Bella Ciao, which is, I guess, how she came up with it. It's quite nice. And then there's only one more thing. It's that, you know, like a lot of these things were made also in with kind of social media in mind, and a lot of people just try to do whatever, just to flood everything. You know, the streets were also very digital in that time, and I think every protest now is as digital as it is physical, because it's about, you know, resonance in different ways. And the thing is that obviously the visual is much more powerful in that way, it can be, because it's much quicker to share. You kind of see it as you're scrolling down on things, but there were also a lot of attempts to do things that were more sound-based. And I think for me, those things, even though they require you to be a little bit more slow when you kind of responding to them, or kind of having them come your way, but I think they, for me, have a much longer lasting impact. Like when I hear all these things, they really have stayed with me, and that's why for me these kind of ideas of, you know, joy and being in a collective and being with people who now are my very good friends, because we spend so many weeks out organizing these things together. That's all part of it, and actually sound and music were a really big part of that. And I want to say that also the sound and music that's used in demonstrations is very deliberate. Like it's not an accident what gets played. So we all have playlists for demonstrations. We all think about what we're going to do. We all think about what kind of action we want to have, depending on what kind of emotion we want to elicit. So it's never an accident what happens. At least in my experience, it wasn't. So this is the last thing I'll play. Then I'll be quiet.
A gdzie masz swoją miseczkę? Dobra, czyli idziemy wszystkie razem teraz, tak? Dobra. Moja macica to nie kaplica, to moje ciało. Sama zdecyduję, czy urodzę, czy wyjdę na ulicę i krzyczeć głośno to, co czuję. Nigdy nie będziesz szła sama, nigdy nie będziesz szła sama, nigdy. Nie będziesz szła sama nigdy, nigdy. Nie będziesz szła sama nigdy. Nie będziesz szła sama nigdy. Nie będziesz szła sama nigdy, nigdy. Nie będziesz szła sama.
Nigdy nie będziesz szła sama, nigdy nie będziesz szła sama, nigdy nie będziesz szła sama, nigdy, nigdy nie będziesz szła sama.
So for context, this was the things that we pasted, where the Polish embassy is now actually being built 2 years later, but it was empty for 10 years, that plot just on Unter den Linden. And the song means my uterus is not your chapel. It's my body, I get to decide. Sorry, I'm translating. And you'll never walk alone. Repeated many times, and that was also one of the main slogans. And that's kind of the thing that has stayed with me, is that now the community it's much. It's not more tangible. I know so many more people. People know each other much better, and I think there's this thing has brought a lot of people together, even if officially we did not get what we wanted. Unofficially, I think it did exactly the opposite of what the government wanted, in that people were much more strongly tied together and strongly tied to this cause. Yeah, that's it. I think that was exactly half an hour. I don't have time for questions.
No, but I think we have still time for some questions.
Maybe a shorter and a longer question. The shorter one is, how many of those videos did you make yourself?
The one you just saw?
Because you've been showing during the whole.
Yeah, so the one just now was from my collective, and the techno demonstration also is from my collective. Other stuff was things I either was at or wasn't at. Actually, it was just I wasn't filming it. No, we had somebody filming us. I was in there, but we were all very hidden away.
it's also going towards like, at the beginning you sort of made us do this listening exercise, right? Where you had a very small, but I'm just wondering like, because when you're there, you have a different association with the thing that you heard than we do, having not been there or having not. And I'm wondering like, because there's this whole like kind of critique, right, of this acousmatic listening, that it's not including that social context that you've made so strong in the presentation. I'm just sort of wondering about that connection.
So you're asking about how it is to present it to people who haven't been part of it, or?
I guess I'm questioning, like, is a focus on like acousmatic sound or sound without context the best way of like talking about sound in relationship to protest?
Well, it wasn't meant to be without context. Like that exercise was just one part of it, but I was trying to contextualize. I mean, it didn't. It's really hard to explain. Like a movement has been growing for actually about 30 years in 30 minutes. Also to try to give enough examples to see what I mean. But it wasn't meant to be completely decontextualized. I'm sorry if I didn't succeed in that, but it was meant to kind of. That's why I try to frame it in the way of like taking up public space and how the Polish government has actually been, the masculine voice has been dominating that kind of space, and what kind of images they were trying to portray. So these kind of shifts that were happening were meant to be in the context of kind of the movement and of its political. Like for me, it's not about it. Actually, I really don't want it to be decontextualized because I think it is extremely contextual what's happening. I don't have time to go into it all now, but a lot of what you were hearing is to do with like both the musical culture of Poland and and also just general like how people are with each other in Poland. Like the reason that, for example, we don't sing traditional music, unlike Palestinians, or like we don't play traditional music, is because it's too associated with the right wing right now. I think there's been attempts at trying to reclaim it, but that's something that never even crossed my mind at the time. This has changed actually a little bit in the last 6 months, but that's not to do with kind of nationhood, but it's more to do with kind of solidarity with Ukraine, because it's a lot of common musical traditions and musical styles. So, but there's a lot of it is extremely contextual. The reason that like I didn't have also time to play all the examples. I thought the Eric Price one was quite funny, and I think I wanted to give an example of something that also was just extremely joyful and kind of silly. Like it wasn't like a high art piece of whatever, but it was there and it had a purpose and it had a huge impact on people. And for me, that's in that moment when that's what you're trying to do, that's the most important thing. But there's a reason why in Polish protests you play hip hop and rock and not other types of music, because those are associated both globally and within Poland as ones that are political, and those are the choices that we make as well. And similarly to like them choosing the Polonaise, like that is something we learned in school maybe when we were like 8 years old and then never again. I think to try to be like, you know what, we need to stop associating this stuff with what the government wants, and actually it's also something we can have fun with. I think that is extremely, that's very political and very contextual to what's going on, because it's of this kind of this grasp that the right wing has on the country right now and continues to have, and will probably have more of until something breaks again. But it's really difficult to explain the Polish political situation that quickly.
When I hear people singing in protest in public space, I find it threatening, but at the same time also inviting. Is there something like this? Do you feel something like this too?
Yes, definitely. I think because I think crowds can be extremely threatening. Because I also, for me at least, the association is that a big crowd, like I think like, oh my God, football players or something, and like they're coming my way. And that's really scary, because that's what you hear like being shouted at often, and I think that's what you're kind of exposed to much more. Whereas I think these protests, they were angry also. So that is scary. Like when anger is the forerunning emotion, then that can be quite scary. But I think, weirdly enough, with that one, it was the most inviting protest I've ever been in. It was the most open, because people were just so angry about this one thing that it kind of didn't matter. People were kind of joined in their anger against a different enemy. The anger wasn't directed at other people, except the football hooligans who tended to kind of be around the sides of the demonstrations sometimes in their very tiny numbers, or like protecting the churches. It was very strange, and also horrifying at the same time. That's what they felt that they needed to do. But that's, you know, this idea of like joy and fear and like hope and anger, like all these things, they come and go, they change within a protest, because actually, when you know also what's at stake. Of course, in Poland, nobody got killed, people got beaten up, and like people got severely injured by the police, and or end up in jail, and some people are still on trial against certain things. But you know, it's not Iran where your life is at stake. But still, you are putting yourself out there, and so there is like a fear. There's a tension that if it goes wrong, you could end up, you know, something bad could happen. So I think you need that tension to keep going. Do you have a question? Thanks. That was the intention.
How were the news reacting on these protests, the Polish news?
Actually, well, we have the national TV channel, and the national news is basically like a propaganda channel for the government now. So they were claiming that there was nobody in the streets, and the counter-protests, the white protests, were huge, which is not true. They had like 50 people turn up, sometimes in Warsaw, which is crazy. The mainstream news were, I think, exclusively supportive. I don't want to lie to you now. I don't remember now. There's obviously like right-wing news outlets in Poland that obviously were against this, but they just couldn't ignore it at some point. And a lot of them, because this wasn't, even though I would have wished for it to have been a much more leftist, radical, you know, revolutionary protest, and there were elements of that, and I didn't have time really to talk about the slogans, but a lot of the slogans were actually extremely radical. Like, you know, when you start talking about solidarity and revolution and care as like the main slogans beyond the swear words, that is actually something extremely radical that comes from a lot of very radical feminist thought, that actually you're focusing on the idea of community, on solidarity, that's about caring for each other. And, you know, like one of them is like, women's revolution is coming now. Or like, if the state won't protect my sister, I will. You know, that stuff is like, it's really powerful. And it's really about like this community building that hasn't happened in Poland for a long time, probably since the 80s. And that was anyway a very different case. So of course, yeah, to answer your question, right-wing outlets were obviously against it, but I think it was a very broad movement. So there were a lot of liberal voices in it too. A lot of people just focused on the hatred of the ruling party, which is a lot of people, despite that they still somehow managed to win elections. So I think everybody kind of went with it. And it was really hard to ignore when you literally couldn't go out in the streets in the evenings in any Polish city and not see it. So I think at some point the news had to also be like, okay, we gotta take this seriously.